Hello? Okay, cool. Hi. So, as Susan mentioned, my name is Jade. I'm 19 years old. I'm from Formosa, and I'm just in my final year at Sacred Heart in Walkerton. So I'm doing like a 13th year. So still kicking around. Haven't gone on away yet. But yeah, I'm going to be sharing a testimony about a time in my life when Jesus really took a hold of my attention, and he had captured it for a while. Just this past year, 2023 was probably the craziest year of my life in a lot of ways, and I'm going to get into that. So I've grown up in a Christian home. When I was young, my parents took me to a Pentecostal church near Toronto, and that was where I found my relationship with Jesus, and where that was really defined. And then as we grew, we moved around a bit. So we went to a Baptist church and another evangelical church. And I had this knowing of God's presence in my life. And I had a relationship with Jesus from a very young age. So that followed me through. But in 2021, we moved to Formosa, and everything was new. And so I was in a new high school, just trying to find my new community, and I stumbled upon this really cool performance group near Teeswater, and I had to audition. I love musical theater. Maybe you could notice that already. But they were doing Little Mermaid, so I got into the show. I got to play Ariel, and that was a really crazy experience. It was so much fun. It was the first time that I had found some real friends and in this new community that I was coming to know in Formosa and Teeswater area. And we had about 19 performances at the Drayton Festival Theatre, and it was just really special to find such good community and friendship there. And then about a week after our last show, so last April, I got a call from a friend saying that a boy in our show who played my opposite, Prince Eric, was found in his apartment in London just after a week after we closed the show, and he had passed away from a diabetic coma. So it was pretty shocking news. I still remember where I was when I discovered that. I didn't think I'd get emotional today, but oh well. That shook me in a way that I hadn't been shaken, really, ever. I always had this strong faith, this certainty in God, and all of a sudden I was asking, why is this happening? Why am I here? Why should I even have to ask this question, God? Why would you take away someone who was so young? And so right away, I was like, okay, clearly there's something going on here. So for about a month after that, I was just in this really dark place, and I was praying, struggling to, but I had to ask, God, why is this happening, and where are you in all of this? And he brought me comfort, and I knew that it was from the Holy Spirit, but it was so hard. It was hard to participate in school, and my friends would have said I completely turned into a new person. I was just so lost. It was tricky. But God was telling me, there's something more coming. Just keep trusting. So I was like, okay, fine, if you say so. And later on, about a month later, I was supposed to be attending the March for Life in Ottawa. So different youth groups sometimes attend that event. I knew that God wanted to reveal something to me at this event, so I just had that little bit of hope. I was like, I think something's coming. I'm just going to keep waiting because that's all I can focus on right now. So it was crazy, but the very first day, the day that we left, we hadn't even arrived yet, and already on the car ride to the March for Life, my friend was sharing a testimony with me about how she wanted to become a Catholic, of all things. And this completely threw me off. Not on my radar at all, but I was just so entranced with her testimony, I couldn't look away. I was like, how? What is this? I need to know your story. I need to hear more. So I listened to her talk about it, and she talked about her life, and So we continued on the ride. And later that morning, we were going to attend a mass. There's usually a very large pro-life mass in the morning before the march. So I didn't really go to mass ever. I had started going to a Catholic school, but I didn't really like going to mass. I didn't really know what it was about. But at this mass, I remember kneeling down in front of, I didn't know what, but kneeling down, and I just felt such comfort like just pour over me. And I was just crying, and I didn't know why or what was going on, but I was like, wow, Jesus is so present right here in this moment. And it was the most direct that I think he's ever been with me in comforting me through something so difficult like loss. And I was like, wow, okay, Jesus, I can hear you, you're here. And I still didn't really understand why or what was going on. But after that trip, I learned more about the Eucharist and Jesus' presence in the Mass. And that kind of started my hunger to learn more about the Catholic Church. And it turned things around for me, and it gave me a new sense of hope. But yeah, a lot came along with that, and I continued to find more answers. And then through the summer, I really wanted to get to know more about the church, and so I started RCIA in the fall, and then I was just confirmed this past Easter. Yeah. So, yeah, God used a really awful situation in my life to not only reveal himself to me, but to reveal himself to a lot of my friends too. And with that community of theater, he gave me the opportunity to also share that peace and that comfort with my other friends in that group. Because it was just so shocking. It changed everything for me. So I have one verse I want to share. It says in John 16, verse 33, "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." And I know I was never promised no hardship or no struggle, that death would not come. That's not something Jesus promised, but he did promise to be there and to comfort me. And so, yeah, that's my story.
Thank you so much, Jade. Wow, you are wise beyond your years. I'm sure you've got so much ahead of you, and it's exciting. Thank you so much for sharing with us. So at this point, we're going to call up Charles. Charles is out there. There he is, yes. And Charles is going to share a few words with us. I think we'll also ask the prayer team if they'd come up and pray. They already prayed for you. Oh, okay. So one prayer session's enough for tonight. Now, fun fact about Charles, I think many of us have heard Charles talk many times, but I think there's at great length, but not tonight. We're right on schedule. We're 2 minutes past schedule, so I will keep it brief. But what you might not know is that Charles is a great orator, teacher. He can boil complex ideas down into simple things that we can all understand. However, you might think his past might have been in religious studies or English or, the classics. But how many know that Charles went to university for mathematics? Does anybody, does this look like a math guy to you? I'm a bit of a math guy. Don't do that. But you can ask him about the Raptors. He knows, I think, every stat about the Raptors. So without further ado, Charles, you're going to push us off from shore tonight, get us on board the ship, and we look forward to hearing from you.
I'm just really happy and joyful to be here. How many people here were part of Alpha? It was part of Alpha. Most people were. I didn't make it this time. I usually like to at least drop in a couple of times. I didn't make it. So I'm just really glad to be here. How about you guys? Yeah, I don't know. It's like, I feel like, even though I wasn't part of the last many weeks or months of you guys being together, I feel like it's a bit of a homecoming. That's how I feel anyway. And of course I love the worship, and not just Sam, but Jade, Kynan, Nikki, Joe. And I'm so grateful for Jade for not only helping us with worship, but also sharing a bit of her testimony. And I know that in the last few times we've had these services and people have shared their testimonies, I think it's just amazing that someone's willing to give a gift to the rest of us of something very personal and maybe even difficult to talk about. So what a privilege that is. Now, the reason I think it's important that you have a chance to hear a bit of what we might call a message is it's not primarily a message from me. I'm here to speak because I believe God has things he wants to say to you this evening. And he speaks to us primarily through the Bible. That's his word. But he speaks to us in so many other ways. And as Jade was talking about, here in the Catholic community, we experience God's presence in many amazing and unique ways, which are celebrated here at Holy Family Parish. And I think it's all amazing. But what my task is, just to take a few minutes this evening, is to get us on board. So the theme, Perfect Storm, came from a conversation that a few of us who were here this evening, we had a couple months ago, and Darcy, who's in the booth up there, came up with that term, Perfect Storm, to describe what we thought everybody here could relate to in some way, shape, or form. The idea of a perfect storm, I haven't seen the movie. Has anyone seen the movie? Quite a number of people. I haven't actually. I borrowed it. I'm probably going to watch it in the next few days. But it's the idea that like everything that's going to go bad catastrophically goes bad all at once. That's a perfect storm, right? Makes sense? And so the verse that's there, it's quite small on the screen. I'm just going to read out to you from the Bible, Psalm 77. It's very interesting that this is the way that God's presence, God is present in this way that's described in these couple of verses from Psalm 77. The crash of your thunder was in the whirlwind. Your lightnings lighted up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen. Where is God in that picture? He's in the middle of a storm, and you can't even see where he's walking, but he's there. The whole storm, which is this terrible catastrophe, is speaking to us of God, and that's what the next 5 weeks are going to be about. So we kind of envision the next 5 weeks as a journey. This is getting on board. Now, I'm pretty much a landlocked person, as most of us here probably are. Has anyone spent a lot of time on the water? I don't. Brian and Susan have. Anyone else? Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Zach, back there. So, however, the first 8 years of my life, I lived in a giant seaport. And I didn't go out in the water a lot. I did a little bit. But my grandfather, whom I remember, was a sailor. So I was thinking a lot about my grandfather over the last few days as I was preparing this message, thinking about what it's like to go to sea. And my mom typed up a few notes just before, in his later years. He died when he was about 75 in the year 1970, January 1970 is when he died. I remember him. I was pretty young myself. I was about 3.5 when my grandfather died. But my mom typed up a few notes, including a recollection of a storm, which I'll mention in a few weeks. One thing about my grandfather that might tie into our message today. So he was born in 1895. When he was quite young, he doesn't even really remember, his mother died. His mother died when he was probably less than 2 years, a year or two old. His mother died. His older sister looked after him. Then his dad remarried. He did not get along with his stepmother. And so he was sent away from home at age 11. Now, he was sent to school, but he stayed in, I don't know why he ended up staying in this. He stayed in a sailors club in the city of Bombay. Not a very nice place, the way the notes describe it. Like, there was a lot of swearing and drinking. That's what his memoirs say. 11 years old. Anyway, I think he was a pretty smart guy. That's the way I remember him. That's the way my mom talks about him. But he didn't do too well at school, and he ended up going to sea. He went on board ship, and he spent much of the rest of his adult life on ships. He was a sailor, like I said. So why does someone get on board? Why did he become a sailor? Why did he leave the familiar place where we're designed to live, which is land, and go to sea? okay? You might want to think about it. What leads someone to get on board, especially if you see a storm is coming, and the storms are coming, right? Do you know that about yourself? Now, you might be in a storm right now. I want to ask you to raise your hand if you're in a storm right now, but I know some of you here, you're in a storm of one kind or another. Maybe more than one kind of storm going on at the same time. And if you're not in a storm right now, you probably know, we don't like to think about it, I don't like to think about it, the storm is coming. Storms are coming. That's why these words, I think, are so profound. It's important that even in the middle of the storm, maybe especially in the middle of the storm, God is present even when we can't see his footprints. We can't see how he's present, but he is there in the middle of the storms of our lives. Over the next few weeks, I've just pulled a few passages from the writings of Paul. Paul wrote most of the letters that are in the New Testament, in the Bible. About a third of the New Testament, I think, was written by Paul. And he was at sea quite a bit, actually. I don't think he was necessarily a sailor, but the way they got around, my grandfather was actually there as a sailor, I know, was the Mediterranean Ocean. It was almost like the superhighway. They could go from one part of the world to another on the Mediterranean. There was a lot of sailing done as well, of course, in the Holy Land. Galilee is a sea and so forth, right? So Paul was often himself at sea. But Paul had a really strange experience, I would guess not like anyone here, because it was pretty unique. Growing up a very faithful and devout member of the Jewish community, he felt called by God to persecute, to arrest, and in some cases have killed the first followers of Jesus. He was out to get the Christians. That's who Paul was. And then all of a sudden, Jesus shows up, and his life is completely turned around. Now, just a little bit about the phrase, getting on board. What does it mean to get on board with Jesus, with faith, with the community of people that he calls together, which we call the church? Here's what Paul says about himself, which this is what getting on board could mean. It's from a letter he wrote to the people of Galatia, letter to the Galatians, chapter 1, just a couple of verses. This is the way he describes himself years after he got on board with Jesus and became a member of his community. Here's what he says about himself. Paul, an apostle, not from men, nor through men, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead, and all the brethren who are with me. That's just a little bit there. And then he goes on to say, but when he who had set me apart before I was born and had called me through his grace was pleased to reveal his Son to me in order that I might preach him among the nations, I did not confer with flesh and blood. Just a couple of quick things that he said there to focus on. Paul called himself an apostle, someone sent by God. But he says, not from men, not through man, but through Jesus Christ and God his Father. And he goes on to say, he who had set me apart, meaning God had set him apart before I was born and called me through his grace. What does Paul know about himself, which is true of you, true of me, true of everyone? That God has actually called you and me and everyone without exception, just like he called Paul. That the call that is on our lives does not come primarily or principally through other people. Sometimes other people convey God's call to us, but it comes to us from God. Furthermore, just as God set Paul apart, God has set you apart for a mission that I would say no one else can fulfill. Okay? Here's the question for tonight. I just want to say reasons you might say no to this question and reasons you might say yes to this question, and then I'll wrap up. Here's the question, though. Are you on board for that? Are you on board for that? Getting on board. Why might you say no to getting on board? Thinking about this thought, the way Paul thinks about himself, that he was called by God, not by other human beings, but by God, and that God has set him apart for a very specific purpose that no one else can fulfill. Now, you might say no to that, okay? One reason you might say no to that is because if you are like me, you already have plans. You've got things at least sort of halfway figured out. You know what you want from life, and you're heading down that path. Now, that's not 100% true of me. I don't think it's 100% true of anyone. But most of us have some idea of what we want out of life. Now, if you have a direction you want to go, if you know the things that make you happy, if you know what success will mean for you, you don't necessarily want to know that God has something that He has in mind for you, because what if that doesn't line up with what you have in mind for yourself? Why might you say no to getting on board? Because you already have a plan, a direction that you have set for yourself. Or maybe that other people set for you, other humans, maybe your parents, maybe your family, maybe your friends, the expectations that come with being a person. You got all the stuff going on, as I do, about where we think we're heading in life, why we think we're heading there, and God wants to come along and say, no, hang on a sec, I've got something in mind for you. I've set you apart for something. You might say no if you already have other plans, other things in mind. Possibly. Another reason you might say no is you might look at the people who are on board, as it were. Imagine a ship about to set off. I can imagine my grandfather, he was a teenager when he went off to sea, and he looks at this ship and he sees the crew. In order to get on board with what God wants for you, you got to join that ship, and you got to join the crew. And you look around and you see the other people, and you ask yourself, do I want to be part of that group? Because that's a group of people who apparently are saying, that's what we're saying here, we're on board for God, or at least we're trying to be, and do you want to be on board with us? You might look around and you say, I'm not sure I want to be part of that group of people. Sam? Yeah, but you're part of the problem. Look, I love Christians. Some of my family are Christians. Some of my best friends are Christians. I'm a Christian, but I know. You know who better than you, better than me? Paul. If you read his letters, they're very personal. Pretty much every letter he wrote to people like the Galatians, the people I just quoted, the letter, people in other cities like Corinth, and so on, a whole bunch of different cities, a whole bunch of different letters. Every time he's writing because these poor, sad Christians, like us today, are continually fighting each other. They're not actually getting along. They're not actually being the people God wants them to be, which is in the first place, to love each other, as he reminds them. Do you ever hear that line, the greatest of these is love? 1 Corinthians chapter 13. He's reminding them of that because they don't show that love for each other. So if you want to get on board with what God has in mind for you, even if you want to follow God, and you look at the group of Christians, you look at the crew on board and you say, do I want to be on that ship with those people? Well, if you're here tonight, you said kind of yes, right? Why are you laughing? Anyway, what's that? We are like pirates. It's true. Christians, pirates, I don't know. Maybe my grandfather was a pirate. Who knows? Can tell you in a few weeks. All right. One more reason you might not want to get on board is, and Jade talked, like I really do appreciate Jade's testimony, because a lot of what I'm saying I feel like she already said and better, because it was more personal about her. But this is what the Bible's saying, so I just want to amplify and echo some of what she said. He does not promise that it's going to be easy. In fact, he pretty much tells you it's going to be really hard. It's going to hurt. It's going to call for sacrifice. How do I know this? How do we know this? Because we just look at the cross. There's our captain. This is the path that we're all going to be on insofar as we are on board. And you might want to say, no, I don't think I'm ready for that. Okay? Reasons you might say no. You're not sure because you have your own plans. You're not sure you like the crew. You're not sure you want to give everything up to follow him, which is what he asks, right? 3 reasons to say no. How about reasons to say yes? Good thing to think about, right? I want you to get on board. I'm hoping you're going to get on board. So reasons to say yes. One of my favorite lines in the Bible. A bunch of disciples have left Jesus because he taught them something that they said was too hard. And the closest core of disciples, led by Peter, says to Jesus says to Peter and the others who are still there, "What about you? Are you also going to leave?" And Peter says to him, "Lord, to whom else are we going to go?" In other words, I got nowhere else to go. I think of my grandfather as an 11-year-old boy, then a teenager. Why would he go to sea? Because he's got nowhere else to go. You've ever been like that? You ever said yes because there's nowhere else to go or nothing else you can possibly imagine doing? You're not necessarily looking forward to getting on board, but there's nowhere else to go. That's actually a reason, different times in my life, and maybe for you as well, that we have said, yes, I'm on board. Okay. Another thing, and this kind of ties into the idea that Paul writes about himself, which is true of you, true of me, true of everyone. God has set you apart before you were born. He's got a part that only you can play in his mind for you. That's actually a reason to say yes, because God's plans for you, and I'm still working on this. I'm not old yet, but I'm getting there. Still working on this. God's plans for me are infinitely better than my own plans for myself. God's plans for me are infinitely better than my own plans for myself. If you told me even 20 years ago, I'd be here, part of this group of you guys here, all of us here this evening, and sharing God's word with you, I would have said, what? I could not have imagined being here, honestly. God's plans for me are way better than my plans for myself. Trust me. That's a reason to say yes. Okay. One last thing. This is so obvious, but it has to be said. As much as God is going to ask the total sacrifice of yourself, just like he asked that of his son, and Jesus says yes, there's this absolutely unique thing about getting on board with God, with Jesus, with the community of people who are struggling to follow him, like we are here at Holy Family. The reason to say yes is Jesus. I mean, really, he is not just like there's nowhere else to go. He's like amazing. He's great. He's wonderful. He's awesome. There's no one else you'd rather be with the closer you get to him. It's not necessarily easy to get close to him because you might feel, as I sometimes do, not sure about where he's going to go with it if you go closer to him. But he is absolutely the source of all pure joy, love, goodness in the middle of all the storms that are going to come, and they're going to come. So that's getting on board. Reasons to say no. Reasons to say yes. I hope you say yes, as I'm doing this very evening. I invite us all to do. Here's our theme verses again from Psalm 77. The crash of thy thunder was in the whirlwind. Thy lightnings lighted up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Thy way was through the sea, thy path through the great waters, yet thy footprints were unseen.